it's one of these sort of weird things where we just got super lucky that the world was changing. The internet arrived in like 95, 96. We were about 2 years old. And um, without really knowing what we were doing, we built this system. It worked. And the crazy thing is, it still runs. There's a whole bunch of banks still running the software that me and the team wrote 30 plus years ago. And and it's kind of fascinating that the things that you build can have such longevity.
Yeah.
But yeah,
No, that's
it
pretty
was a very
cool.
strange situation because I was super young. I was 20 when I landed here, and I landed in Wilmington, North Carolina, which is about as uncosmopolitan a city as you can imagine. Not that I came from a big place. I came from Canberra, which is a pretty small town. And but it was so funny because I couldn't drink. And in Australia, the drinking age is 18. So I was like, what do I do now? And I couldn't rent a car because I was under 25. So my friend Bill lent me his Saab convertible, which back in the day was pretty hot car. And then they'd stockpile beer at my apartment on the beach. And that was work life. It was just continuous.
That sounds like a pretty awesome work life there. But yeah, it sounds like a lot of fun when you first come over and started your career. Yeah, and then I guess you carried on there. You were at Phoenix for what 6 years, if I'm correct, until '99.
Yeah, 6, 7 years exactly. And then couple of crazy people and me created a new startup called Bayport, and we
Yeah.
built a QuickBooks killer back in 1999. And it was one of these amazing things where the tech didn't wasn't ready yet. So Internet Explorer 4 had just come out, maybe Internet Explorer 5, I can't remember. And the internet was very primitive. Everyone was still on dial-up modems. And we built a system that basically functioned like QuickBooks. We could import all your accounts, your ledgering, and all of that stuff. And then we did a deal with Dell, and Dell had an icon for us on their homepage of the home screen of every small
Wow.
business computer, which is pretty crazy when we were like getting started and building and so on. But it was true.com, zero to like 150, 180 employees back to zero in 18 months. It
Really?
was,
So what, back to zero in 18 months?
yeah, like dot coms, very few survived.
Yeah.
Um, and it was one of these things where everything was going awesome until then it hit a wall and then everything just stopped.
Yeah.
And the problem was the idea was perfect. The product was really, really good. Our biggest competitor at the time was called NetLedger. And NetLedger then got bought by or Larry Ellison and became NetSuite. And so with deep pockets, they continued to grow and we had better features. And it's the classic thing of we built a better product, but we ran out of runway to distribute the product. And then we got hosed. And that's kind of not uncommon in startup life where you come up with a great idea, get some initial traction, and then it just bursts. And I'm seeing this a bunch actually lately with friends that are trying to build different sorts of agentic AI type of stuff and solutions, and folks that are, I mean, the parallels of like NFTs and crypto and blockchain and all of this sort of stuff have had these curves where there's extreme growth, then there's market reconsolidation, and then the real businesses start. And so out of .com, lots of real companies actually did get started, but started later. If you think of the classic fail was Webvan, but fast forward 10, 15 years later and you have Instacart, kind of the same product, but just built with newer tech, newer platforms, GPS and all of these services, and asset light versus asset heavy.
Yeah, that's pretty incredible. Also, when you draw the parallels to what's going on today, like every startup you see is AI powered, or you look at Y Combinator, the 10 companies coming out of there, they're all AI, and their requests for startups are AI. But a lot of that, like you see Gemini trying to do now, or OpenAI or Anthropic. So I wonder if something similar is going to happen there. Um, so yeah, then and afterwards, I you moved to Nokia as well, and you started there as
Mm-hmm.
director of mobile email development, and that's something we all take for granted today, mobile email, but I guess not. So could you maybe explain the innovation that led to something so
Well,
ubiquitous?
that's yet another startup. So I was living in DC. 9/11 had happened. Startups were going in a bad place. DC itself was not in a good spot. And then along comes this startup that says, "Hey, we've built a Linux box that can act as a mobile email gateway for any phone." And back in those days, there were no smartphones. It was all dumb phones with text browsers, and you could literally, text a text number and get your email read back to you and so forth. It was pretty primitive. And so we came up with this appliance which worked really, really well. And we got Nokia to invest early on, and they ended up buying the company in May of 2002. And so we did this fantastic acquisition and process. And it was really interesting because I was doing my MBA at the same time. And it was almost like this perfect case study of a startup that gets bought by a major conglomerate and then takes a single line item. And I think we only had one customer, maybe two at the time. And then we get rolled into Nokia. And suddenly the structure and the shape of the company went from 21 people in Pittsburgh to there was a big team in Helsinki, there was a team in Singapore, there was a team in Mountain View, and we're doing this global worldwide launch. And it was so much fun. And meanwhile, I'm theoretically commuting from Helsinki back to business school at College Park, Maryland, and going back again to Helsinki over the weekend. It was kind of insane.
Yeah, I mean that sounds incredible. And also the transition from 20 people to now like an international organization. I can only imagine, going from like a small startup to like a large monolith like that.
It
Um,
shows you the power of brand, right? So as a startup, even with the coolest idea, if you can't find distribution, people find who you are and recognize you, it's not going to go anywhere. And there's so many great startups that amazing founders, cool product that just never make critical mass because they don't have a brand or an identity or a way of getting to the consumer. And
yeah,
then on the flip side, at the time, Nokia was king of the world. So it was like half of every phone store in the world across every country. It was a huge company, bigger brand than Apple. It was massive. And then we took this idea that we thought was right, distributed it through Nokia's infrastructure, and suddenly hundreds, if not thousands, of companies were saying, "That sounds great. I hate my BlackBerry. How do I replace it?" And then they followed on with phones with keyboards, and Nokia became a player in that. And then along came the iPhone, and then they died. But
yeah.
bygones.
Yeah, but that's pretty sick. So anyway, so then where was I? So afterwards Nokia, you worked at Yodely, am I correct?
Yeah.
Yeah, so from 2004 to 2011, where again you were part of some pretty big innovations there as well, like the Money Center, the FinApp Store, Yodely 10. So yeah, could you I guess share about this time of your career?
So Yodlee was great. Yodlee was when I joined, I started as I think SVP of engineering. So I was running the Eng team. And the company was kind of stalled out. It had about 1 million active users, 5 million total. And the product feature set was really focused on high net worth individuals. And we created all the APIs that the likes of Plaid and others have subsequently also rebuilt. But what we built was this ability to download all your data from Morgan Stanley or Wealthfront or whatever, ingest it all like Plaid would do account verification, but we'd pull all the data, all your credit card transactions, everything, to build this personal finance experience. Which, if you're rich, is actually quite complicated because you have bank accounts all over the place. Um, we had most of the rich people on the platform already because we had clients like Merrill Lynch, Citi Private, um, Bank of America, etc. What we didn't have was scale. So in 2005, we after sort of cleaning up all of the engineering stuff, we came up with this idea called Money Center, which was personal finance on the web, replacing what had just died, which was Microsoft Money, and Quicken had just about died as well by then. So back in those days, you used to go to the Best Buys and pick up a CD once a year of Microsoft Money's newest edition and all this sort of stuff. So we built that. We launched it with Bank of America first and called it My Portfolio. And suddenly we had gazillions of users. It was fantastic because it turned out that the needs of personal finance are for everybody needs to know, where's my money? How can I afford to buy this thing? What's my budget and forecast look like, and so forth. And it wasn't just the provenance for the rich. And that's what really propelled the company to continue to grow. We added lots of clients. We added a lot of products that are sort of resurging right now. Things like card funded bill pay, where we would take your credit card, log on to Verizon, and put your card on file at Verizon so that you would start getting recurring bills on your credit card, that sort of thing. It was pretty fun and grew it really, really nicely. I left in 2011 to join Google, and joining Google was really a very different transition for me. So at Yodlee, I sort of had engineering and product and operations and go to market and all that sort of stuff. At Google, I was just running product for the payments team, and then ultimately the Google Wallet product. And so losing control of engineering was a very strange experience. It was like, okay, I know what I want to build. Hey, team, go build it. And now it was, hey, I know what I want to build. Hey, VP of engineering, can I convince you that the thing I'm doing is kind of cool? And will you please build it for me? It was a very different style of operating where you don't get to control so much as influence and cajole and encourage. And so it taught me completely different skills of being a product leader and stuff like that at Google. While I was at Google, Yodlee ended up going public, which was great. Um, and that then allowed me to do a bunch of sort of hobby startups after Google for a while, just to sort of detox from corporate life. In the meantime, I was COO at Postmates. That was insane. We were growing
Yeah,
5 to 10% a week. And a very different job, non-technical at all. It
yeah,
was operating the fleet, doing recruiting, basic, order management. So this was pre Postmates even having a tablet.
wow.
So every single order we called to the restaurant. So imagine having a call center. You said you want 3 pizzas from Delfina Pizza. We would call Delfina Pizza and say, hey, 3 pizzas. And they'd say, oh, we're out of cheese. And you're like, how the fuck can you be out of cheese? Pardon my French. And, and we're like, well, what's your substitute? So, but it was all done human to human. And then we started to evolve that. We did a great deal with Apple to do real-time delivery of Apple Store products. We did a deal with Starbucks, which was really fun, proving you could deliver coffee and still be warm when it was arrived by a courier. Lots of fun things in that interim period.
Yeah, I start to notice a little bit of a trend with your careers. You always get right on the forefront of things when they're like maybe one or two people know them, and then suddenly they blow up to like millions of people. When you started the mobile development, and then you expanded into Nokia, and then at Yodlee you grew from 1.5 million to 30 million, and that's Postmates as well. Sounds like you continued that trend. Um,
Yeah, I feel like left a little bit of the monetization on the table. I was probably too itchy to try the next thing. Um, so I've left. I would be a lot wealthier if I'd stayed behind at some of the other companies that I'd worked at earlier. But I like to oscillate between big company experience,
yeah.
crazy startup experience, big company experience, to just both provide capital so that I can afford to live without actually having a proper salary for a long time, but also just change the stimulation curve, right? It's very different being CEO of your own thing, even if the team's a couple hundred people, than working for a giant organization with 10,000 people or 50,000 people or
Yeah.
100,000 people. And learning those different skills, I think I've gotten better at. I wouldn't say I'm great at it, but I know what it takes and how to plug into different sized organizations at this point.
Definitely, I can imagine going from like a startup to Google. There's a little bit of a transition there. But anyway, yeah. So after you had mentioned earlier that after Google you started some kind of cool startups like the Perfect Sip and also Angel Scholars, and then I also see on your LinkedIn that you were advisor to a bunch of to really cool startups like Grub Market and Sipri. Were there any really cool projects that you worked on during this time?
Yeah, look, I think for me, part of what I try to do is have some stimulation from ideas that are in different spaces that I know anything about. So I didn't know anything about Grub Market. And the founder used to be an engineering director on my team, Mike. And he's like, could you help me start a company to corner the market on grocery supplies for restaurants? And I was like, the hell do I know about grocery supplies for restaurants? But there are some fundamentals. There's like a supply marketplace dynamics, buyers and sellers. So the sellers would be the farmers and the creators. The buyers would be the restaurants. So there's some similarities of marketplace dynamics that you can play. And Perfect Sip was super fun. It was a web-based multi-level marketing wine sales organization. So think of it like Avon, but for wine. So 8 to 10 women get together on a Thursday night. One of the women leads the conversation, sort of teaches people about pairing wine with food and drinks and stuff. And at the end of the night, you buy what you love. It's fantastic. It's like a brilliant use case of connecting people in the real world with offline experiences. The challenge was we had done a partnership with this great guy, Frederick Eklund, who was like totally on brand. He was based in New York at the time. He was the star of $1 Million Listings, New York on Bravo. And he was like very glamorous and this sort of perfect person to pitch wine. We built him a wine. We took the wine to market. And then about 2 months into it, he's like, I've just had twins. And I was like, I empathize. I have twins. And he's like, I've decided I'm never posting again on Instagram. And I was like, dude, this is like right before our Series A. What are you doing to me? And that was it. These things
Wow,
happen to startups. Like, done, game over.
that's brutal.
And yeah, and this is the serendipity of startup life. Sometimes there are things you can control, and sometimes there are things you can't control. And getting bent around the axle around the things that you feel like you should be able to control, but really are outside your control, is just makes you frustrated and sad and grumpy. And I don't know. The only answer is try it a few times and figure out what you really, really matters
Yeah.
to you.
Yeah, I can imagine. I never really thought about it as being luck so much because I guess with the other guests that I've had on, they've kind of started their one thing and they've continued on because they're so young. They haven't had time to go here and do this and go there and do that. But it's nice when you have a little bit of experience like this and have gone all over. But then I guess moving on, you were the head of Uber Money. I know you talk about that everywhere at every talk you do, but I guess I got to ask again myself because that's a really cool thing that he did. He also did the tapping pay there, and again
Mhm.
something really ubiquitous. So I guess I'm really interested that you really led a team, and Uber is a lot more than I think. And I know a lot of people hear about Uber and why is the valuation so high and why is it such a crazy startup. So maybe could you explain a little bit about Uber?
So Uber was super fun. It's a crucible of real-time operations and human interaction. Person's waiting in line for a car at the airport, and the back end infrastructure has 60 seconds to decide, are you the good match for this trip, this ride, this everything. And that's about as much time as the consumer is prepared to wait. So in real time, we're checking, will this consumer end up in a place where there's going to be another trip? Who's the best driver? There's millions of drivers, millions of riders, and you're doing that matchmaking exercise. Then you're thinking about safety. Will they be okay together in the room? And you're thinking about speed and is the car big enough to fit their luggage if they're at the airport and all that sort of stuff. And under the covers of all that is this promise that Travis came up with, which was this no checkout checkout. You just get out of the Uber. You don't negotiate price. It's already been pre-negotiated. You don't pay until after the fact. And so you've got to find ways to make payment ubiquitous, which means trying to support every type of payment method under the sun. And because Uber is so global, that means every payment method under the sun in 70 countries. And then you have to have wallets, and then you have to have cash. And then that's capturing money from riders. Then you have to pay drivers in 70 countries. And you can't pay drivers everywhere. It's quite painful. Some of the markets, there's no local payment method that works. And we had this brand promise that once a week we would pay you by no matter what for free. So we would have some drivers that would earn $27 in Taiwan, and it would cost us $30 to send them $27. But our commitment to them was you get one payment a week for free. Where things evolved was we compressed time. So weekly payments became daily payments became multiple times per day, and then ultimately real time. So after every trip, you just get paid. And that compression of time really created a lot of value for the drivers. because it felt like a cash trip, which with safety. And so they could then pay their bills, they could run their lives. Because most of the drivers, or many of the drivers that we worked with, or the partners, were cash flow to cash flow. So they didn't have a whole big $10,000 sitting in checking. They had enough to pay for gas, they had enough to buy food for dinner, that sort of thing. And so the more immediate you could make their cash, the faster they could live their lives. And that became a huge unlock for us. Uber was really, really fun. I would do it again in a heartbeat. Unfortunately, COVID hit and we scaled back some of the ambitions on the payments team. And that yielded an opportunity to sort of rip out that concept of the payments team that we had at Uber into a small company. And that's what Synctera became. And so, unlike Uber, where I had this huge payment engineering team, most companies Synctera works with don't have big payment teams at all, but they want the same experience of being able to create a bank account or a wallet or a charge card or a credit card or something. And that's what Synctera became.
Yeah, no, that's really cool. But before we get into Synctera, now that we're on it, so you've been with startups, and large companies over the years. Now looking at the current startup, when you have these unicorns, and even today I read these super unicorns, these startups that are worth $5 billion plus, and you having been at large companies that have been worth $5 billion, where do you think that future is heading? Do you think it's not going to favor these startups, or do you think it's going to be continues to be these monoliths that are making all the changes?
Look, I think there will always be the successful startup that creates a new category or uh, has deep adventures in the space. If you think about OpenAI and or Anthropic and those folks, Google had been doing this stuff with DeepMind ages before. They just hadn't figured out a way to explain it to the consumer that it was happening. And OpenAI basically came up with these large language models and shaped a new model for the end user. They get vast amounts of dollars dropped into them so they can scale in multiple vectors. And OpenAI, Anthropic, and others are effectively copying Apple and Google's playbook of a Play Store, which is you build an infrastructure, you watch what innovation happens, and anything that has high traction, you just go add as a feature to the platform. So it becomes either a strategy like back in the day where everybody built a company to be bought by Google or Facebook. Now people are building companies to be bought by OpenAI because they do one vertical really nicely and they can plug into the OpenAI infrastructure as a new vertical or new capability. So I don't know, startups are fun. They will always exist, particularly here in Silicon Valley, because there's always that person that just left OpenAI with $25 million signing bonus and doesn't like it anymore and says, hey, I'm going to go and do my own startup. Um, I do think it's harder and harder to have a breakout success as a really early stage player. The game has lifted up, but the cost to build has decreased dramatically in most categories. The solo unicorns, I think, are pretty unique and interesting sort of development. One person running a company worth $1 billion. I'm not super convinced that there's much protectable moats around those businesses. So I think they'll get folded into something else and the valuations will drop as a result. But right now it's super frenzy. I mean, I'm sure you've interviewed a bunch of folks, but here in Silicon Valley, deal flow is insane right now. And it's a lot like, reminds me a lot of like 2011, 2014, 2015, where everyone was innovating around mobile ads. So at Google, we had this existential crisis where ad revenue from mobile was, like, I think it was 2012, maybe it was 2013, exceeded desktop revenue. And everyone freaked out because on the iPhone, we were getting booted off because Apple with iOS 6 or iPhone 6, maybe it was iOS 5, took out the Google app off the iPhone and Google Maps got booted off and Apple launched their own maps. So the ability of the biggest buying community on mobile, which was iPhone users, having access to Google's search properties was lowered. So there was this huge rush at Google to build a new version of Google Maps that ran on iPhone to launch search, to launch mobile apps, whereas in the past we were sort of quite content on desktop. And today it feels like that transition all over again, where there was a land rush to build mobile. Now there's a land rush to build AI. I'm not super convinced most of the business models make much sense yet, but it's inevitable that we'll figure it out.
Yeah. Now, yeah, I touched upon that a little bit before when you were talking about these startup unicorns and their valuation. Now, it's interesting when DeepSeek launched their model back in January, the Nvidia stock plummeted. But then yesterday I was reading that now again they're the most valuable company in the world. So, what do you think about this volatility that you're seeing these large corporations so volatile?
Um, well, the reality is because Google, Facebook, and Meta and have actual operating businesses, their investment curves are different. Google or Microsoft or Meta can say, we're going to put 25, $30 billion behind data centers for our AI usage. And they just peel that out of operating cash flow. OpenAI doesn't have that much revenue yet, so they have to take investment. And so the flexibility of the big guys to compete is different. And none is certain, but it would be, I think it would be a foolish move to bet against Microsoft, Google, and Meta in this space. And OpenAI, I think, is thriving and is going to be an awesome player. So is Anthropic. But thinking that Google is dead, I don't see that happening.
Yeah. So anyway, I guess getting on to Synctera, which you started in 2020, and it looks like you've been here 4 years, which is maybe your longest stay at a startup. You must really like it. Could you tell us a little bit about Synctera and what you do? I understand it's an API for developers and banking as a service.
Yeah, so Synctera basically makes it easy for any non-fintech or banking company to launch fintech-like stuff. So imagine you're a software company writing software for veterinarians and you do scheduling, bookings, maybe a little bit of inventory management of drugs that are used to feed to help a cat or a dog that comes into the vet. And you say, hey, actually, what we really need is business banking for the vet owner. And we want lending so that we can help them buy some new equipment. All of that business banking and lending stuff will make that vertical SaaS veterinarian software company more sticky and more reliable. And so we build the banking components to help the vets launch banking to their stores without having to do that work. It's we don't have any glamour. We have no user experience. We're APIs and backwards, but we also do the thorny part of keeping track of all the money. So we built our own mini core banking system, kind of like the thing I built 30 years ago. And we do calculating interest, making payments, sending wires, all that sort of stuff, issuing debit and credit cards, and so on, so that the other company doesn't have to learn how to do any of that stuff. At the same time, we also maintain a marketplace of banks that will support the activities of the customer. And that's what we do. So it's a two-sided marketplace, fintechs and brands on one side, banks on the other. And we're the glue that sits in between, helping the banks do end-of-day reconciliation and banking and helping the fintechs do their daily operations and execution.
That's it's really cool to be at that intersection. It's like a really cool fintech that you have there. Um, So another thing that I wanted to talk about that I saw on your LinkedIn was Hustle 2.0, and that seems like a really cool mission, and it seems like something that you're really interested in. So if you wanted to talk about that.
Yeah, Hustle 2.0 or its original version, DeFi, is something really unique. So it's an opportunity for entrepreneurs and business leaders and people of interesting backgrounds to spend a day or two inside a prison working with the entrepreneurs in training, EITs, we call them, to think about how to start a career after they leave prison. Because the biggest challenge for folks coming out of prison, let's say you've been in a supermax prison for 20, 30 years, is you don't know what the world is. And the only thing you know is gang life. And if you go back to gang life, the chances are, with sort of 90% probability, you'll be back in prison within 90 days, which is really terrible. So what we try to do is give them skills and opportunities to start businesses that are not prison, not gang related. And we help them with going through meeting parole boards, and we help them with adjusting to human interaction because all their interactions have been with other guys inside the prison. It's really not for the faint of heart. It's quite intimidating the first time you go into a supermax prison. but it's extraordinarily rewarding. And some of the guys that have gotten out have become really good friends. They come over to the house, they hang out with my kids. And these are people that have done some really horrible things in the past, but that's not who they are. That's what they used to be.
Yeah, that really sounds like a powerful transformation that they get to even come over and that you trust them enough like that. So it's really interesting. I've been listening to, I guess, of course, everything you said, and you just I have no other way of saying it, but you just know so much. Like everything you say is just so interesting. And I would really enjoy asking questions that would really take everything you know. But I guess I don't even know enough to ask you questions, and this is something that I have an issue with my guests. So I guess to everybody else listening, do you have any advice for them how to get out there and just to learn as much as you could?
Um, I guess I'd put it in one macro: work on things you love and that interest you personally and professionally at the same time. Nothing is worse than working on stuff that you don't actually get excited or interested in, because you'll find it dissatisfying even if you win. So, passion for what you do is sort of the fundamental building block of the things that I work on. For me personally, I only work on things that I can see, feel, touch, and experience. And I deliberately don't work on things that have um, unfortunate or horrible consequences if you get it wrong. So I will never work on heart rate monitor software for the hospital that is checking whether you're still alive in the room type of thing, because I don't want to be the guy that wrote the bad algorithm that didn't detect your blood rate and you die. I'm never going to work on hospital software. But anything else is fair game, particularly if I can explain it to my mom and she gets it. Um, so work on things you love, work on things that feel like you know what they are and you can use them yourself. Um, that's what sort of inspires me.
Yeah. I also like that. That was kind of a cool message. Things you could explain to your mom. I guess because I still do that. That resonates a little bit with me. But anyway, this is I guess been our time, half an hour. I don't want I'm sure you're busy. I don't want to take too much of your time anymore. But thank you for joining me today on this podcast. I really enjoyed our conversation.
Pleasure talking to you, Danny. And I think go and do what you love. You're a good interviewer. Maybe that's your jam. I don't know. We'll
Thank you.
see.
Well, I try.
Awesome. Alrighty, man. Lovely chatting with you. I'm going to jump onto my next meeting, but this was really great. Thank you.